I'm delighted to welcome you here this evening. So this is the latest in a series of lectures that I'm hosting as part of the Women in Public Life campaign. And this is aimed at getting more women in Wales involved in civic and public life. Central to the campaign is providing strong role models through a series of keynote lectures featuring women who are successful in male-dominated fields. So far, we've welcomed human rights campaigner Shami Chakrabarti, broadcaster and loose woman Janet Street Porter, leading scientist Baroness Susan Greenfield, and former New Zealand Prime Minister and UN Ambassador Helen Clark. And in the new year, as a little bit of a forewarning, we're having Julie Gillard, the former Prime Minister of Australia. So they all gave us very interesting insights into their particular fields, but more importantly, they shared with us their stories and their personal challenges to get where they are today. Now, women are naturally less confident than men, and for them to believe in themselves, it is crucial for them to have role models. And if we have role models, they can then really appreciate that they are not alone, and this is important, they are not alone, and the challenges they face are shared by other women. Now, Meera's session tonight will focus on how women can be empowered by the digital age to initiate change and make their voices heard. But before I hand over to Meera for what promises to be an inspirational talk, I want to tell you a little bit more about her. Meera leads communications for Ashoka India and is working towards leveraging digital media for social change and empowerment. All very modern words, those, aren't they? So through the use of citizen journalism platforms, Meera explores creative ways that young women can participate in political, community and governance matters. She also facilitates dialogue between entrepreneurs, innovators and institutions to tackle global issues and gender rights and sexual violence. Now, in 2013, she won the CNN-IBN Citizen Journalist Award for her reporting in the aftermath of the Delhi rape case. In 2014, she presented a talk on finding a voice against sexual violence at the TEDx Houses of Parliament, which was held in London, in an ongoing effort to spark global action against sexual violence. I've spent half an hour or so with Meera, and I must say I'm quite inspired. And I am confident we will leave here tonight inspired by her words. And now, I just give you a warm welcome, please, for Meera.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to see a lot of new faces and nice to be in Wales. This is my first time in Wales, so I have been having a good time exploring. So first, I want to thank you all for coming here this evening. And I especially want to thank the presiding officer, Dame Rosemary Butler, AM, and the National Assembly for having me here. Now, this evening, I know a lot of you are wondering what we're going to be talking about. And I say we because I am looking at this more as a dialogue, a discussion where we can learn from each other. It is an intimate gathering after all. And since we are gathered here today to discuss what voice means, I think I'll start talking a little bit about what I think and what I've noticed about the word. And one of the things we've noticed, obviously, is that we use this term voice, this word voice, a lot in the media because it's getting harder and harder to have a real conversation. I was on the Heathrow Express yesterday, and there were two gentlemen behind me, and we were trying to buy coffee in the pantry car. And the woman behind the counter, she kept saying, "Good morning, sir. What would you like?" And for 5 minutes, they didn't hear her because they were on their mobile phones. And she was just, she was trying so hard to get their attention, although it's, they were customers. And it just struck me then that, I'm sure all of us here know how disconnected we are when we have our phones or any kind of technology in front of us. So to begin with, I just wanted to show you how we use this word, and I wanted to show you a few titles which, appear in the media. And somehow the way we use it, the way we use the word voice, is always to suggest some kind of marginalization. A voice is no more just an articulation, a sound which we use to communicate with each other, a sound, something that's very central to the human experience. In fact, I think the discourse about this marginalized voice is so strong in the media today that you just have to look at it in any title or any newspaper article, and you kind of know you're going to be either talking about women, poverty, or minorities. In fact, see, why Arab women still have no voice. Many women in India are living with no choice, voice, or rights. Voices of women in India's rape capital. So this is very common in the media today, to talk about voice as something that someone has to fight to have. It's not something they already have. And the reason why we use the voice so much this way, I think, is because it's getting harder and harder to be heard. The internet is like being in a room where everyone's talking and no one's listening to you. And I think a lot of us here who are on social media, especially on Facebook and Twitter, have at some point wanted to deactivate our accounts because of the noise. Which begs the question, why do we bother then? Why do we bother being online? And I'm sure there are many reasons for this, but fundamentally I think we bother because we all recognize the need to partake in life outside our physical environment. And not just that, we enjoy the duality the internet offers. We connect with our friends, we connect with people around the world, and sometimes it allows us to be someone who we are not in our real lives. And it's also a medium that helps you disconnect from reality a lot. 2 years ago, in December 2012, a brutal rape on the streets of Delhi shook India. A 23-year-old physiotherapy intern and her friend had boarded a private bus, and they were attacked by 6 men. She was brutally gang-raped, thrown out of the bus, and left to die on the road. Her friend, who was also attacked, trying to protect her, survived to tell the story. Sitting at home, I remember watching the chilling events of that evening unfold. There were a lot of angry people on the streets protesting, asking the government why it is not taking the issue of sexual violence in India very seriously. News channels were playing images like this over and over again. They were playing images of the bus this girl was assaulted in. And almost everyone I knew at that point was calling for the death penalty. I remember logging online that day, and for many days after, finding myself skimming through hundreds of news articles that was talking about the case, each report more horrific than the other, with gruesome details of what had happened. And I remember feeling so unsettled about how the news media was capitalizing on the situation. So on social media, people were sharing solidarity messages, their thoughts, and signing petitions. And walking on the street a few months after the event, the fear of being alone as a woman was so established in public discourse by that time that a lot of us could barely walk out without looking over our shoulders and wondering, what if? Like, what if that happened to me? So I remember feeling really helpless as a citizen, and especially as a woman, to be able to do anything to change that situation. But why did it matter that I was a woman? Now, for reasons I cannot completely explain or understand, it did. In India, like in many other countries, young people, especially young women, do not participate actively in governance. And sometimes this is despite having the opportunity to do so. Most of the times, women are almost entirely excluded from any kind of mainstream or political dialogue. And the main reason young women, I say young relatively, of course, project a deep apathy towards civic participation is because they often feel that governance or anything that relates to power is beyond their reach, and they don't think that what they say matters to drive any change in the system. Now, of course, in a lot of other countries, men have more access to the internet, but even in countries like the United States or the United Kingdom, or in other parts of the developed world, where women do have higher access, they're still not very active in participating in the system. Now, I don't know if many of you have seen the recent Pew survey. It said that one of the things it said was 76% of women in the US use social networking sites. And women use social networking sites a lot, way more than men, especially Facebook. They share their photos, they share their thoughts, they're always talking about things, they're talking to their friends, they're always engaging in some way or the other on social media. Yet, when it comes to participating or using social media for something else, like the closest that women come to is using it for social activism. They don't necessarily use the medium to do anything much more than that. Like they don't necessarily voice their opinions or have an opinion about what's happening in politics. And even if they do, they're very worried that they may be judged for it. So there's a lot of insecurity and confidence issues with the way women use social media. My experience in blogging and digital journalism has taught me many lessons. I found that while digital media platforms often had the tendency to overwhelm us, they also offered a crucial channel for expression. I also found that the more I talked about things that mattered to me as a citizen, the more conflict I invited. One of the first platforms I used was a global citizen journalism platform called CNN Report. I don't know if many of you have logged on to the main news sites that, like BBC or CNN or any of the other main news sites. A lot of news sites now have started introducing a citizen journalism segment so that people can kind of engage better. And CNN Report is one of the bigger established citizen journalism platforms where a lot of global dialogue happens with people around the world. And I later began to blog on a national platform called Citizen Journalist back in India. I didn't have a clear idea of what I was going to do. I just knew I had to do something, and I went online and I decided I will use my skills. I was a communications person, and I decided whatever it is, I will use my skills to talk about it and to speak up about what I was witnessing in Bangalore, which is the city where I'm from. So I began to document a lot of personal video and photo reports to highlight a citizen's view of what was happening after the Delhi gang rape in Bangalore. And these reports incited global discussion on sexual violence. It helped a lot of people around the world see the country in a different light. Moreover, I think it helped people see what it was like to be a woman living in a city in India who's working, who's living in a city alone. And I am definitely not the demographic that represents the Indian woman as a whole. Obviously, there are very different women come from all kinds of backgrounds, but my experience was very related to what a woman living in a city, in an urban setting was. It also made me incredibly aware of the challenges that women face in the digital sphere. Most women in the public sphere, despite having the ability to access platforms to express their views, find it difficult to do so without bullying, threats to life, severe harassment, or violent backlash. They face all of these things. And a lot of comments that I received were vile, hateful, and even misogynist. And no, they weren't only from male readers. In fact, a lot of women also did not take well to other women expressing their views. And the pattern in these comments were very telling of the highly reactive nature of the audience on the internet. Responsible commentary is often shadowed by rhetoric, trolling, or even, sometimes people are just frustrated and they will just have to rant a lot. So no wonder then that it requires such an effort on the part of an average citizen like you and me to speak up about certain issues. And it became clear to me in that initial period that the personal cost of participating in the system is very high. It's incredibly high. Cyberbullying, particularly against women, is a real problem. And I admit that it's an uncomfortable subject. I don't mean to undermine the bullying that men face or young boys face or what sexual minorities face. Certainly that's very, very important. But the specific risks that women and young girls are vulnerable to be shamed, to be threatened with physical violence, to be denounced for sexual expression, that is not a problem. That is a complete tragedy. I mean, one of the examples that I can think of is obviously Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn, both gaming developers. That was an extreme example of the kind of abuse women are vulnerable to in the online world. Now, if anything, the Gamergate controversy is a reminder that in fields where women are a tiny minority, the risks they take to stay involved in a system are very, very high. Take the recent example of the catcalling video. I'm sure a lot of people have seen that, seen this going around on our Facebook posts, and all of us have at some point watched it, or have been forced to watch it because people are sharing it so much. And you have the same version of the catcalling video in a lot of different ways. People did that in other parts of NYC. People did that in Bombay, in other parts of the world. That actress, Shoshana Roberts, actually had rape threats after she did that video. Now, women, in that Pew survey, it's also said that 25% of young women are victims of some form of harassment online. And the study also cited that the harshest forms of abuse, like physical threats, stalking, sexual harassment, are almost always reserved for women. And then you have a problem like doxing, where you have hackers kind of taking all your personal information and putting it in public domain to shame you. Let's not forget Celebgate. I know that a lot of us were, recently reading that in the news, where celebrities like Jennifer Lawrence and Kate Upton all of their photos were leaked into public domain. And the thing is, a lot of people keep asking, will it stop? But the thing which people don't understand is that a lot of women actually tolerate a lot of sexual abuse online. So when I receive comments, people ask me, what do you do? The truth is, I'm ashamed to say this, but I don't do anything about it. I don't know what to do about it. Because one, you don't have enough knowledge what to do. You take the easy way out, which is ignore it. Sure, you must ignore a lot of things, but at what point do you want to take action against harassment online? Are we better informed about laws? Do we know our rights very well when we log online and get attacked? And I've realized, learning from colleagues and watching a lot of people go through a similar experience, that a lot of women simply have to overcome so many challenges when it comes to dealing with online harassment. And that ranges from getting over a confidence issue, saying that stop blaming themselves, and there's a power gap, there's a knowledge gap, and I think it is a first step where we have to kind of look at all these issues and then think about online harassment as a larger subject, because otherwise we are always going to be victims. And I personally don't think I would want to be known as a victim, because you're not a victim just for speaking up about whatever you think as a citizen, and I don't think you should be called a victim for it. And I think now there are some measures being taken, because Twitter has recently teamed up with a women's advocacy group to curb gendered sexual harassment. They've put a form there where you can kind of go and report what are the tweets you're getting, or if you see a particular Twitter handle attacking you, you can definitely do all of that. And cybersecurity is being discussed for sure, but as is the better implementation of laws. But I'm not sure how it's going to change things if people who are being harassed don't confront the harassment and don't kind of equip themselves with enough knowledge and power to kind of confront harassment. What's clear for sure is that the women's movement in the digital world is going through a transition. And I would say that's a very complex transition. Through the stories I covered on the ground since the Delhi rape in 2012, I hope to introduce a new way for an audience to experience the news, and that was through personal storytelling. Citizen journalism opened my eyes to what is possible, to what can be, if a lot more of us, both as men and women, change the way we approach discussions. Now, as a woman in India, I found it immensely liberating to use a platform to talk about issues like gendered sexual harassment, which affected me, and the influence it had on the lives of a lot of young women in the city. I also used it to suggest ways that we as members of a society could work together to end this and comment on news events which are happening in the mainstream media. This is a perspective that is very seldom seen in the media in India. In 2011, I was part of the anti-corruption protests that were sweeping India. This was held in Freedom Park, and although it looks like an angry protest, this was a very, very peaceful protest where people were, coming together as a community, and they were asking the government and writing little telegrams to the government saying what they want to see, what is the change that they want to see in their country. In 2012, I was at Freedom Park, where groups of young students gathered together to question the government about rising crimes in the city. These were all, this was a bunch of college students who had come together. It was a rainy day, but they decided that they'll have a candlelight vigil and just kept lighting the candles over and over again. Then in 2013, I was part of an interesting protest where young men came forward to wear skirts to prove that clothing doesn't invite rape. So a lot of men got together, I think about 100 of them, in the park, and all of them wore skirts for, I think, a couple of hours, and they had like these placards, they had like these small slogans which said, "Oh, so are you gonna like touch me now?" It was a really interesting protest because you could see that a lot of young men were also part of the movement, and that was a huge step forward. It wasn't just, it wasn't just anger, but it was also trying to break stereotypes in a way. This was February 2013. This was Valentine's Day, and it was part of the 1 Billion Rising campaign. So many citizens lit candles and gathered together in the park at night, sat together, and talked about how they can change their city. And they shared stories with each other. They kind of talked about how they can be with each other and how they can be a stronger community. And it was very clear that these stories were never coming out in the mainstream media. All of these stories were they were just known to the people who were there. And these were stories that needed to be told. And somehow the negativity in the press was so strong at that point that this story would not have sold. This was a few months ago, in July, when I was at the Bangalore child rape case protest, where 5,000 people marched down the street to push the police to take action against the accused of the child rape case to increase security measures in schools. Citizens came out on the streets when a 6-year-old girl was raped by 2 staff members in the school premises. On the ground, a sense of community prevailed. People stood with each other, talked openly, discussed their frustrations. But when I went home to check and participate in online conversations, it was a whole other story. A sense of anger, frustration, and unfathomable rage was everywhere on the web. And there were only 3 kinds of people who were commenting: angry citizens calling for the death penalty, passive activists who were signing, like sharing petitions and things like that, and internet trolls, which were just everywhere. Now, young girls whose lives that this incident affected the most, because remember, this happened in an international school. A young girl was raped when she was left at school, and it was just in the morning, and it was just raped by 2 staff members. This was 5,000 people who were mostly parents. This was a silent march where they were marching to the police station to ask why hasn't the school taken accountability? And if you see, this incident where they shut down the school affected young girls the most, because a lot of girls who went to that school, a lot of parents were kind of policing their children. They were stopping their girls. They were like, you should not go to school because it's not safe for you anymore. Everything they did, they were trying to hold back girls, when in fact it was very important for these girls to be a part of these discussions. Yet, they were completely left out of this dialogue. And the debates on sexual violence remained the same: hang those guilty and problem solved. But was it solved? Not at all. Since July, there were 5 or perhaps more cases of sexual assault in Bangalore schools. And I guess these were only reported cases. This led me to wonder, why is it that we are unable to address or talk about real issues in a way they matter? Why are we unable to have a conversation that can have any real impact on the ground? And I think the reason is that because we as a people are naturally selective. We select who we listen to. We select who will speak. And even with social media and its uses for digital journalism, I think that young women who are very capable of expressing their views online are finding it challenging to do so in a way that they can create and drive change, because as a people, we have created a digital environment that isn't inclusive and not conducive to conversation at all. But I think with a little bit of courage and determination, we can change this. Take the case of Michaela Cross, a young girl in the United States who posted an iReport about the sexual harassment that she faced while traveling in India as a student. Michaela's report was shared over 100,000 times on social media and sparked outrage globally. In the report, she pointed out that she faced molestation and sexual harassment while she was traveling in India. Yet, there were several women, I being one of them, who felt that the most important point that the report raised was missed by the larger public, and that is, sexual violence against women is a real problem. Instead, the media was busy talking about Indians, the way Indians are, the state of the system in India, and so on and so forth, which I don't deny is important, but that is not the central focus of the issue. So in response to Michaela, I recorded an iReport at the time, and I remember feeling a sense of despair because I was asking myself, what if? What if I said something completely different to what is the global take on this issue? Eventually, I posted a response to her, and that allowed me to get in touch with this girl through the network. And it helped me, more than anything, change the conversation a little bit and analyze the problem instead of encouraging people to rant about India. And the result of that was that the universities actually started the conversation and put the conversation back on track, which is sexual violence against on campuses, which a lot of young women like Michaela face. And it was very, very important that 2 people, no matter how opposing their views were, got together and brought back that conversation on track, because it was very important it doesn't get blown out all over the place, and that was a huge step for us. And part of the problem I also sense is that the women's movement has somehow distanced a lot of people. And as it's come under heavy criticism. And I don't know how many people have, we're all online, so I guess we might see the term feminazi everywhere. And it's a term I personally loathe, and something that was used by an American talk show, Rush Limbaugh, in the 90s, and is still being used today to kind of denounce and degrade the feminist movement. And it's funny because it's driving more people away from a just cause, a cause for equality, and a cause that was indeed encouraging more women to participate in conversations and act. A lot of young women are very active on social media and look to social media to better inform themselves. Like, whenever we log on to Twitter, we also get a lot of news on Twitter. We also get a lot of news from what our friends share on Facebook. And clearly, there's something we're doing wrong if young women today are rejecting the very idea of feminism. Take this, for example. This was a campaign called Women Against Feminism. It was a hashtag, and it was a response to all of the recent feminism hashtags, which was going around. And this is a very good example of what's going wrong with young women online. Now these are young girls who are holding up pledges which say why they are anti-feminism. And if you look closely, one of it says, "It has turned the rights movement into a sexist, corrupt, and hateful organization." There's another one which says, "Feminism is supposed to be about equality, but that's not how it works." And this had more than 15,000 people tweeting, and a lot of women holding up these pledges, a lot of young girls holding up pledges saying that they are anti-feminist, they do not want. So one of the comments on BuzzFeed, where a lot of these images were posted, said, "Are they confusing feminism with misandry?" It's a valid question, isn't it? But it's also a telling one. I remember a few months ago, we hosted a conference in India. It was in line with TEDx, and we chose a slightly unusual setting for it. We chose a pub, and we decided that we'll get a small panel at the corner of the pub so that everyone who comes in on a Friday evening, men and women, could join in the conference and discuss the experiences of the young urban woman. And during the Q&A session, one girl stood up and she said, "I don't know what all of you are talking about. I have never been discriminated against. I've never faced any harassment or anything. So I really don't know what to say to any of you." Now, after like half an hour of discussing issues, if someone said that, no one knew what to say. Obviously, everyone was looking at each other and wondering, what do we say? And that showed me that we need to take a look back at the conversations we are having online as well. Digital journalism is definitely in its infancy, and we are all aware of its merits. We are aware of the power of the internet, but the problem is we've become so focused on presentation and less so on representation. We talk a lot about ourselves online. We talk a lot about what matters to us, what food we are eating, what clothes we are wearing, and when we could use that channel to do something bigger than that. The other day, I was looking at my Google News feed, and I saw the Break the Internet photograph that was doing the rounds. I know a lot of us have seen it, haven't we? And we've also been wondering how Kim Kardashian could pull off something like that. And I remember reading a lot of these news articles about Kim Kardashian doing that photograph. And a lot of them were saying, she is a negative role model, young women shouldn't look up to her. And I absolutely agreed with that. But the more I thought about it, the more I found that I couldn't think of alternatives. I couldn't think of the positive role models that women have. I mean, can you think of someone, or how many people can we think of, who who we all want to be like on the internet. I can barely think of a lot of people. In fact, if you like Google who are the 50 most popular women on the web or 50 most influential women on the web, trust me, I tried all of that. And I was like, the first 40 people are always celebrities, musicians, reality TV stars, or soap opera stars. And then you have like a few tech entrepreneurs or someone at the very end. And you also have to like look them up on Wikipedia because you don't really know who they are. so that's very sad if you ask me. And thinking out loud, I think this is I think perhaps what we need to do is that instead of trying to sell the idea of feminism or equality to young women, because it's clearly not selling to them, we're doing a bad job at it. And what I could think of doing is maybe we could make feminism what they want. We could take feminism where take it to all the cool places that they are in, and make it a part of those conversations. I mean, why is the F word, as they call feminism, why can't it be other F words? Why can't it be fun, famous, fantastic, fabulous? Like, those are all great F words, and I think we should look at it in that way. Look at it in a positive way to like engage young women online towards talking about what matters to them. And I think the central thing is that at the core theme of all this is always empowerment. And empowerment is always a topic that's talked about when it concerns young women especially, because somehow it's always looked at that women don't have power. Somehow that they need to be empowered, like somehow power has to be given to them. And when we look at public discourse in the media, we always demand better computers, faster internet, better service providers. And there comes a point that we have all of these things, and we still achieve very little when it comes to changing ourselves. And the other day, I was asking one of my colleagues, so you've got your own car, you live alone, you have a great apartment, a great job. So do you think your voice matters? Do you feel empowered? She said no. I mean, no, it didn't mean anything to her. Like, she didn't feel that she can have all of these things which we are always trying to give to women, which is education, which is, better access to whether it's the internet or give them smartphones. We're always like thinking of things to give. And of course, women can have all these things and still not feel like they have any power, right? So my view on the idea of empowerment is that we cannot empower someone by simply giving them access. Of course, access is very important. Women do need access more. We need more television, internet, media. But I think that women need to confront themselves more. And women's voices are lost online, even in countries where a large number of them use the internet, because we aren't loud enough in our demands. We are insecure about our opinions most of the time, and we are hardly confident in taking on bigger challenges, right? Especially harassment. So we need to ask ourselves these rather uncomfortable questions as a first step. The thing I want to say is that the responsibilities that a global citizen has are many, and clearly we cannot solve each and every one of them. But there is a lot that we cannot ignore. The advancement of senior women in senior ranks of government and public life has been discussed worldwide, and we did have a chance to talk about it as well. I had a chance to talk about it with the presiding officer before this. The participation of women in citizenship, in practicing their right to vote, to voice opinions, or to take part in decision-making is very important, and we don't do much of that. I was reading up a lot about Wales before I came here. I was really happy to see how much it's a part of the conversation here, and yes, the numbers are falling, Yes, women are not represented as well as they were like 10 years ago. But the opportunity here is immense, and the question is probably, are citizens taking the right steps to participate? Which is pretty much the same question in a few other countries as well. Like in the UK, I read that more than 80% of the country has access to the internet. In Wales, the numbers are more or less the same. And a lot of people have access to a tablet or a smartphone or the computer at home. But the problem here is that a lot of people feel digitally excluded, and a lot of people sometimes don't want the internet, and they don't want the noise that the internet can be. But I want to show you what's possible if we change our own attitudes online. What happens when men and women start looking at the digital world as something that is not something we switch on and switch off every day as a medium to exercise. As every day as like something that is really annoying or something that we need to use and kind of just log off. But how about if we look at it as a medium to exercise citizenship? How about we look at it as a medium to represent our communities and challenge ourselves? In India, social innovation is flourishing and has become a very, very important facilitator for these conversations, and it has opened a lot of doors for women. Young people are defining what it means to use their skills to leverage digital mediums to participate in society. Young women are also very vocal, more vocal than ever before, to overcome societal barriers to voicing their opinions. This is a glimpse of what Video Volunteers, a social enterprise in India that is empowering women from marginalized communities. So what this enterprise does is very interesting. They go to the most disenfranchised or the most marginalized populations, which are absolutely not represented at all. It trains women in basic ICT skills, in basic communication technologies like using a smartphone or using a tablet, and it gives them a small kit. A lot of these women, when they are trained, start reporting their own stories. This is a woman called Amita Tute. She's an Adivasi. Adivasis are ethnic minorities in India, and they have been struggling for many years to access their own rights to their lands. They live in the forest. And she's from Jharkhand, and the region which she's from has been under conflict for a lot of time. And today, with these basic skills, she's become a grassroots crusader for many young women in the region. She's trying to report more on their stories. A lot of them, sometimes they are accused of being rebels. She reports and has saved the life of many young women. And she's also encouraging and using this medium to get more girls into education. This is another example. This is a community-focused, citizen-led initiative called Blank Noise, which encourages men and women to pledge, take action, and speak up against sexual harassment through creative expression. Now, if you see those two women there, they're holding like a closet thing with a lot of clothes. That is actually an exhibition of clothes that women have worn when they were harassed. So it has all kinds of clothes. It has kurtis, it has a blouse, it has a sari. What they were trying to address is the issue of blame and the guilt that stems from being harassed. So what they wanted to do was come together as a community, as both girls and boys, and use social media platforms to kind of break stereotypes and create positive debate and transform public perceptions about harassment. So the campaign was called I Never Asked for It. The whole campaign is about completely rejecting blame and standing up for oneself and speaking up and taking ownership of the problem so that you can confront yourself about it. I think the point that I want to make is that life in the digital world is complex, and it's certainly not easy for women given the challenges that they face. However, I think that we can change that because the possibilities are endless if we look at it differently. And I wish I could offer you some kind of exceptional advice about achieving those equal numbers or how you can change things overnight, but I have only 3 things which I've learned and in the years that I've been practicing as a journalist who writes on the topic of sexual violence in India. And one of those things is that we can change things and we have the power to change things, even if it means that we have to fight harder for it, if we actually want to do it. If you want to do something, there is nothing that's stopping you from doing it. And I see a lot of my peers who are also working women, sometimes who are very held down by what they think society, how they think society will judge them. And that's something that you see everywhere. And that's definitely a huge battle, even for me sometimes. And I think overcoming that and making yourself, exposing yourself a little bit, or exposing yourself to that risk a little bit can actually change a lot of things. 2, I think we need to ask ourselves those questions, those uncomfortable questions. Is it okay to stay silent when you're watching injustice happen in front of your eyes? Or is it okay to shun responsibility because, you know, you're not part of what you think you're witnessing? I don't think it is. I think we absolutely have to take responsibility for the world we live in. And 3, I think this is definitely one of the things that I think is very important. I think we have to care enough. In my profession, I see a lot of people saying, I don't care. Like, it's okay, I don't care. Like, I don't care for this issue, or I don't care for this. I think it's very easy for us to say that. It's very, very easy to say you don't care about something. Sure, you don't have to care for comments which are misogynistic or care for online harassment, but you have to care about it. You have to care that it happens. Because only if you care enough, or if we care enough for each other, I think we can actually take steps towards ending it. Because otherwise, it's definitely going to affect our lives offline, no matter how apathetic we are, it's definitely going to show in our lives. So that's it. Thank you. So thank you for listening to me. And of course, if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to take them. Just one, I've been asked by Llais, there's just one thing I would like you to know. If you're going to ask in Welsh, you might have to use your headphones. So, and if someone's asking questions, or I'm not going to be answering in Welsh, but if someone is asking questions in Welsh, or someone's speaking in Welsh, you can use the headphones. And yeah, I'd be happy to take any questions. No questions? Yes, of course.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a few questions, because I think, you know, the world has changed so much in the last 10 to 15 years since the internet. And I'd like to ask, where does the responsibility lie with media and all the immorality that is put out in the form of games and TV shows and films that, you know, our children are seeing whether we want them to or not? And the messages that come through are so conflicting with what we're brought up as moral citizens and, you know, working towards family and children and continuation of the human race, really. Yeah. And it just seems that there's such a conflict and, you know, dichotomy of messages coming through. It's schizophrenic messages all the way through media on women's image, on sexuality, on relationships. And there's more influence, I think, now of immorality than there is of morals.
Yeah.
So how can we change that?
It's a question about, it's a very long question. So, okay, if I could make that a little shorter. Are you asking about morality and messaging in the media and how can we change that? right? How can we create positive messages for children? I think definitely, I mean, that's a good question. It's also a hard goal to achieve, I guess, in today's world with the exposure that people have on the media. And I would definitely think that you cannot, as much as you want to, own the media. Definitely the media is owned by corporates and everyone knows that, but I think the influence that the media has on children, or even people who are not children, even adults, is immense. And with the question of morality, I think it's very difficult once you've grown enough to make individual choices to kind of take some of what media offers and to kind of reject other things. Because I think what you see in the media a lot today is you see a lot of opinions. You see a lot of people not discussing, not really enjoying any kind of positive debate. Positive debate is something that's completely lacking, and the moral question is definitely related to that. I think it's less to do about the values that we grew up, because a lot of that comes from home, comes from our schools, and how we project that on the media, how we project that online is definitely different, because I've noticed that a lot of completely passionate, caring people bring out a different side to them online. You don't recognize them, and that is a dangerous slope there, because the anonymity that the internet offers lets you be whoever you are, like no matter how destructive you can be, no matter how dangerous or negative you can be. And I think we need to do something about it. We cannot regulate anything, for sure, but I think what we can do is put more positive messages in, and especially direct more people towards positive messaging. If you see today, I think even if you use the internet a lot, you surf a lot, or use social media a lot, negative messaging is really high. People take a lot from negative messaging. It's very easy to share, it's very easy to feel angry. Positive messaging is kind of really limited, and I would think that change might help. So I'm not sure if that completely answered the long question, but I hope that answered a little bit. Yes?
More than once you referred to a lack of confidence in our opinions, and
Yes.
when you talked about the Michaela case, the campus violence,
Yes, yeah.
you said, what if I put something out there that goes against the grain? Could you say more about that, and what maybe we think the consequences are, and why we lack, or why there is that lack of confidence in opinion?
The lack of confidence is definitely, I'm sure there's definitely a lot of data. I remember watching Janet Porter's talk, and she had also addressed this self-confidence gap. It's there in a lot of discussions, especially with women entering the corporate world, asking for higher salaries. They don't do that very much. And with the Michaela case, I think it was more my own insecurities with taking a completely different, not agreeing with the public, and that's a very it's a very hard thing to do. It's a very difficult thing when the whole world is saying something. It's like being in a classroom and everyone is saying something and you say, no, I don't agree. And sometimes a lot of people who don't agree will not say so. And I thought it was very important to say so in Michaela's case, because I sensed that the conversation was going completely off track, because it's very easy for it's like mob mentality. No one thinks, everyone behaves the same way. And to introduce some kind of rational thinking is very hard when everyone is really charged and full of it's very angry, filled with negative emotions, and you try and make try and introduce rational discussion. It was very hard. So of course, when I posted that I-report, and I said, well, yes, things do happen, but when you analyze what she has alleged in her report, you kind of wonder whether, as an individual, you would do exactly those things before you come to India. The reason why I say that is that whichever country you're traveling to, or wherever you're going to, you must be aware of the risks. You must be informed better. And I will never say that a person is to blame for what has happened to them. That never is the case. That is absolutely something I don't agree with. But I think it's very important to weigh your options before doing that. And that's what I wanted to say. It's a dangerous thing to say when someone has experienced sexual harassment in any way. And I tried to kind of introduce the idea of practicalities of travel before you come to India. A lot of women are not, who travel in India and especially want to travel by themselves, travel alone, or travel with friends, sometimes don't know about don't really know the environment very well before, or don't know the cultural norms, or don't know all of these little small things which can affect them negatively. And I think Michaela's case was one such example of that. And I wanted to be able to talk to her in some way and tell her that that experience is extremely unique in the way she's presented it, because all the instances what she had described are not instances that Indian women will immediately identify with, because you're mentally prepared to avoid all of those situations. So I was trying to explain and steer the conversation away from that and see, okay, this has happened. How can we stop it from happening? How can people avoid this happening? Instead of saying India is horrible, India is this, that's not constructive conversation in any way. If you have a problem, let us discuss the solution so that other people are not affected by it. And that was what I wanted to bring forward. That didn't go very well. And clearly it didn't go very well. So I obviously posted an I-report, and I had a lot of comments which were like, well, you don't know this, you don't, and I took that all with a pinch of salt, because it eventually changed the conversation. It eventually got people talking about it. Oh, maybe we should do this. Maybe if we're traveling in Goa, we shouldn't be in these areas, and we should probably look at other areas. And that was very important, because it's too easy to say that it'll happen to everybody. No, it doesn't happen to everybody, and that's something we've got to come to terms with. And that was my difficult step in not agreeing with the crowd and going and putting my neck out there and saying what I felt about things. And eventually, after I did that, I saw a lot more women and men do that. So a lot more people were talking about what we can do to change it, instead of talking about, instead of just negatively responding to the situation. Yes. Anyone else? Yeah?
Thank you. Earlier this year, I went to see Laura Bates talking about the Everyday Sexism Project. And I think my biggest take-home message from that was the sense that this was a woman who was angry and quite justifiably angry, but she wasn't somebody who had lost her sense of humour. And what came across, there was one wonderful thing, if you'll excuse me for the kindly slightly more squeamish in the audience. There had been trolling posts of a sexual nature, sort of things like show us your pussy. And what they did was to organise a round-robin thing where they bombarded the people who sent these who posted these trolling messages. They sent them endless photographs of little kittens. Oh. And I just thought that was absolutely brilliant because it was a response with humour. And in the end, in fact, they were contacted by the person concerned who said, please, I promise I won't do it again, just stop it. I can't take any more photos of kittens.
Yes, yeah. I think humor works very well. A few years ago in India, we had a politician we had a very extremely right-wing politician make comments about women and how they should be, etc. And they organized it was obviously a serious attacks on women who were going to pubs. So they said this is against our culture and all sorts of other things which were absolutely nonsensical. But at the end of the day, they went and attacked a lot of young girls who had gone out for a drink or gone out with their friends, etc. So in response to that, they organized something called the Pink Chaddi campaign. Chaddi is underwear in Hindi. And what they did was a lot of girls just sent in their underwear to this politician. And they sent boxes and boxes of underwears. And finally, it just got to a point where all of them were just sending so much underwear that the party headquarters couldn't accept it anymore. And they just didn't have a way to retaliate. They couldn't do anything because it was a soft way of rejecting violence. And it was also a humorous way, and everyone took part in that. And boxes of underwear going from every state to this one man's office, which is like a small party office somewhere. And I think we all enjoyed that, absolutely. We completely enjoyed taking that on with a little bit of humor. I would definitely agree with that, yes.
What are your thoughts on what measures should be taken to convert negative messages to positive message?
Oh, that's a hard one, isn't it? People, I think there's something about the media today where we enjoy fear. Like, we really enjoy the idea of the sense of fear. And we kind of like being, we're kind of in an environment where we're bombarded with messages of fear, whether it's terrorism, whether it's Ebola. I mean, Ebola was like the recent one. Like, some of it was so absurd. There was like this map which was going around which just showed these West African countries like this and said, these are the countries with Ebola, with Africa is like this big. But yet, every person assumed that every country in Africa has some kind of Ebola virus going on. And I think what we can do is change the way we communicate and absolutely stop encouraging negative messaging in any form. One of the things that I personally do is don't give people the publicity that they're seeking through negative media. Absolutely not. Especially things that shame people. I know Monica Lewinsky gave a speech recently after 16 years. She was absolutely shamed for that, and I was wondering why. Here is someone who has been completely branded well before the internet even has the reach it has now. And she's giving a talk, and people still remember her. She was branded and labeled so badly that you still remember Monica Lewinsky as Monica Lewinsky, the person who's whatever the president. And if she's coming out after 16 years and speaking about it and trying to overcome that shame, and we still take her and make her feel bad about that, like you still make her and shame her as a person, well, we never did that to the president somehow. And I think one of the things that I personally never do, is try to encourage people who are doing that. And because that is what they're seeking, that is what they want. Recently in India, a very well-known actress called Deepika Padukone was a victim of this whole public shaming incident. So in a tabloid newspaper, they had published a shot of her cleavage, and they had tweeted it. She obviously tweeted back and said, "Why are you doing this? Like, that is not news. Like, you don't have to tweet a picture of my cleavage, right?" To which the tabloid tweeted her saying, "Well, it's a compliment. So why not? It's your cleavage. You have a good cleavage. Why can't I compliment you on that?" That's not a compliment at all. You would never do that to someone. You're doing that because you're a celebrity, and you think because you are a person working in a news magazine or a tabloid that you can do that. What happened was, in retaliation, the editor printed a series of photographs of her in a bikini on the front page of the society section or whatever. And the headline read, "Well, why are you taking it out on us when you expose yourself and expose your body? Clearly you have no morals." So they had this whole shaming campaign just in a mainstream newspaper. And one of the things that people did was absolutely not share that link. And that was a very, very good response to rejecting negative media. If you think that you do not agree with that, or that this is in some way not right, you don't have to do it. You don't have to be that one other person sharing it or supporting that. Especially all these videos, which I don't know how newspapers do this, or not newspapers, online news magazines, where they say, "Graphic image warning." Why? Like, why do you have to put graphic images of people who are held captive by terrorists or being beheaded? You don't have to do that. That is absolutely disrespectful. And one of the things you can do is absolutely pay no attention to it and completely make sure that they don't get any money out of it. And I think that's a soft way we can do it. In the larger way, I think it's hard. I think it's definitely hard because a lot of people are using sponsored posts. They're marketing. There's a lot of marketing that goes behind these messages. But rejecting is definitely a first step. Is there anyone else? Yes?
Hello, thank you very much. I really enjoyed your talk. I was thinking about your point about the women against feminism and not being a victim, and this kind of negative connotation that was around feminism now. And you were saying that we could make it sort of like be fun and things instead. But it seemed to me that what was really missing there was a sense of solidarity, and it was a very individualist culture. So because something bad hasn't happened to me, then I don't have to take any action for somebody else, and not realizing that even if you're a woman, you might still be privileged in lots of other ways, which some other people aren't. So that part of it has to be sort of, and then even just sort of saying, well, the other way is to say it's fun. Well, that isn't really kind of going to get there, because it's about trying to address and share and actually take risks to stand up for things. Because, I mean, even last night I came across a conference that's been partly funded by the Welsh government, and it's about healthcare innovation. I work in healthcare, and at this conference there are 29 speakers, and only one of them is a woman. Now,
Oh, wow.
this is, you know, and healthcare is a kind of an industry which women are very, have a very, very participant in. So it's like, how can this actually happen? And I wonder what responsibility governments, in a way, actually have to be able to drive and to nearly say, we're funding something, we expect there not to nearly be because we've got so worried about saying, well, is this just like positive discrimination, and that just means that women are victims and they aren't able to be there in their own right and all the rest of it. But whenever you can see that happening in 2014, it strikes me that we do need to actually just do something more.
Yeah, I think someone pointed it out as well. I think my boyfriend here pointed it out. He said, well, the word feminism the word is very favorable to women, isn't it? Like, you know, you're saying it's about equality, but when you say it out loud, you kind of think it's kind of tilting to the side of women. Although it's supposed to be an equality movement, and men don't feel as drawn to it with the word, because it says feminism, as it would if it was equality or something which is not so, which is gender neutral, like equality. And I think you've raised fair points. It's very hard for me to like think of it being, think of how we can kind of like remove the positive discrimination. I think discrimination exists, and whether it's kind of direct or indirect, or whether it's kind of we can see it and identify it, it remains that because of, like you said, you noticed that there was one speaker who was female and the rest were all male. Sometimes it's staring at you in the face and you kind of don't know what to do about it. And I come from the social sector, and I would definitely think that there are more women in the social sector than there are men. And somehow no one has a problem with that. And that is a problem, because you need more skills in other ways. You need different perspectives in the social sector. And it's the same with early education and early childhood care. And I was at a conference a few weeks ago. It was called Men Engage, where we were discussing how can we include men in the conversation. And a lot of things which were discussed were so important, and I feel that that's absolutely not discussed enough. One, do men have enough mentorship for fatherhood? There's a lot of things you see about motherhood, like how much do we talk about fatherhood? Do young single fathers have access to thing? Do they know enough about sexual and reproductive health? Do they know enough about caregiving? Do they know a lot about intimacy or managing conflict? And you realize that we have quite failed in that part. Like, it's only becoming a conversation now because you're looking at men, what concerns men, how they feel, etc., and why that is so important to kind of pull into the so-called women's movement right now, because men are a huge part of the women's movement. And about making it fun, I think that's going to be a tough one. It's definitely a tough one. So I don't know how we'd be able to do that. But one thing I know for sure is that, yes, the victim blaming and looking at women as victims all the time, and kind of that discrimination has to go. And just because it's the same with reservation, right? Like you have reservation being called for in a lot of positions of government for women. Pardon? No, I'm talking about in India, or where there's a lot of men in the parliament, and you have very little representation. So then they have a percentage, which is where you have reservation for women to come forward to encourage more women to participate, and you still don't see it. And a lot of women don't want to go under reservation. They just want to be judged on merit, right? Like the meritocracy is something we should definitely discuss, and you're absolutely right about that. we don't do that enough. And I think that comes with us actually kind of being gender neutral in everything. Like a lot of, I don't know, maybe not everything, but to a certain extent, we don't look at it that way, I guess.
Thank you. I'm interested in the campaigns you've done and the campaigns you raised in this, that challenge rape culture, and the use that you had of the digital voice, for example, in those, and whether you've actually seen any impact and longevity in the wider community. For instance, I work for Rape Crisis, and we often sort of hold campaigns and challenge it, and what we're very much keen on doing is challenging the general public's perceptions around rape myths, so that juries have an understanding who are made up from people of our community, so that when we have cases we get many more convictions, and we also encourage many more survivors to come forward. I'm wondering if you have, through the campaigns you've done, seen similar sort of improvements in India.
These were not campaigns that I did. I mean, this is a person who I know very well who does it, and I work with her very closely. We have done, yes, I have done a lot of campaigns with Social Good, with Time for Equality, a lot of smaller organizations that I work with. But I think one of the most recent ones which we did, which was very powerful and very India-focused, was a campaign that was talking about how people interact with the police. That is not something very easy in India. The police they're state actors, and they are your first obstacle, because police have challenges of their own. The police force has fallen behind on what kind of people, what kind of people make up the force, and they come with their own prejudices. And a lot of times there are not enough women police stations. There's an absolute lack of empathy in the Indian police system. Now, when someone faces sexual harassment on the street, say they've been groped or molested or anything like that, one would think you would go to the police. But in India, a lot of sexual assault happens in police stations. So you wouldn't want to go to the police. So you would not want to kind of, be there. So we did a campaign with Amnesty International. We did a chat about what is it that we can change, about what can we do to change the way we interact with the police about harassment. And the theme of that was not just to get people, women and men, to talk about the police as, how can we engage with the police, because they're state actors and they are your first key to justice, per se. But it was to humanize the police. And that really mattered, because we never look at the police as humans. We just look at them as the police, like some people who come and go, right? But when we introduced the police as people with feelings, or people who have jobs, who have families to get back to, then you look at that person and you may look at that person differently. And it's a similar way what we wanted to work with the police to kind of look at the way citizens are differently. And that is trying to tell them, because a woman is coming and telling you that, she's been harassed, it doesn't mean she invited that. When I was attacked once, it was 11 a.m. I was taking printouts in a shop, and a bunch of two men on a motorcycle came and dragged me down, and they took my things away, and they touched me, and I ran, and I was so frantic at that time, and I wasn't thinking anything. All my money had been taken away. I lost everything. I was just running like a crazy person. And someone saw me running on the road. It was a busy road. No one did anything, because you don't have a bystander culture where people look out for each other, which is a very dangerous thing when you have an apathetic society like that. And when I went to the police station, the police officer did not allow me to file a complaint. He said, well, what were you doing alone at 11 o'clock in the morning? I'm like, what do you want me to do? Like, why can't I be out at 11 a.m. in the morning? And you can't make that case because he has all the power and you are left with no power. And the power, when it's like that, when the balance is not like that. So we did a campaign with Amnesty. We did a very big we did a huge Twitter conference, and we involved a lot of organizations, especially men's rights organizations as well, in the conversation, because a lot of the police force are men. They're not women, about how we can change this. And that had a lot of results with people taking away different ideas on how they can interact with the police. And they wrote back saying, when I approach the police officer the next time, I'm not going to do it I'm not going to project that I have less knowledge than him. One of the ways to do that was to equip yourself with enough knowledge about the law, which a lot of people don't. They go to the police absolutely not knowing their rights at all, and you can be taken for a ride. And a lot of women did that, and I think that was definitely a victory for us. Okay, is that all? Okay, last question for sure.
About these campaign on social media, and you mentioned with the nighttime candlelit visual in the park,
Yeah.
and I was just interested in whether the mainstream media actually took up these campaigns, or whether it was very much the social media filling the gap that they were leaving out. And do you see that changing in that the more that these kind of campaigns are done on social media, that the mainstream media will pick them up?
Social media definitely fills a lot of gaps, and I am, as much as people complain about Facebook and Twitter, in a country like India where we have very less representation in the English media, social media works a lot. So this was not very well covered at all, the campaign with the candlelight vigil. Everyone was there on St. Valentine's Day. Hardly anybody covered it because everyone was busy talking about how unsafe India was and how, yes, it's all of that, but people were doing something about it and the world had to know about it. And social media was a very good channel for that, because at a time when everyone was being negative, communities got together to try and put back the positive and to change the conversation. And Bangalore especially has a very good sense of community. So you have a lot of Facebook groups where people kind of organize meets, where people kind of come together, whether it's, for a peaceful march or whether it's to discuss some issues. And the police have actually now even embraced social media because of that. So the Bangalore Traffic Police, they are very, very active on social media, and they kind of interact with citizens. And more governments are actually trying to see how they can use social media to reach out to citizens, because mainstream media, I would think, is really failing. You cannot look at a newspaper and not see advertisements on every page. Like, it's awful. It's absolutely awful, and it's sad. And on social media, you don't have that, because you have a community where you can talk to very easily. People use that medium to talk. And this campaign, along with a lot of others, which have happened in Bangalore and other cities, in Mumbai and Delhi, they don't get seen. And people know it only through mediums like Facebook. And it's fine if it doesn't have that world reach or, that global reach. What's important is, I think, that people in that city or in that country know that these things are happening. Because if we only relied on the media to inform ourselves, we'll really have an information deficit. You really need people to talk about what's happening around them. And that's why it's very important to stay not just connected, but to stay very in tune with your environment to bring out these topics. I sense that in Wales too. I think there's a big sense of community here. Citizen journalism is being talked about a lot. And I think Cardiff University set up a Center for Community Journalism recently. I was looking at that. You're nodding. So I think that's a very, very good step, because when you have a sense of community, a lot of things definitely fall in place, because there's some representation, there's some togetherness, and that's very important. Okay. Well, thanks so much, and it was a great evening. Thank you.